morning. It's Friday. We are almost over this epically, astrologically crazy week. I wasn't going to go live this morning because I didn't really feel like it. I didn't really sleep well. But I decided that I should go live because a lot of y'all don't follow me on Twitter. So you miss my tweets about what's going on. And so I have to come on here and tell you. So today, usually at the beginning or prior to, when do I post this? Prior to Mercury entering its retrograde shadow, I generally create a graphic of all the important events associated with any particular Mercury retrograde. So I posted that back in February sometime. I think Mercury entered its retrograde shadow February 18th. So the graphic is up on my Instagram page if you want to find it. But the past few Mercury retrogrades have been like very consistent in that going back to the one from the summer of 2018 to the fall and winter of 2018 till now, all of these Mercury retrogrades have featured a series of repeated aspects with Jupiter. The one in the fall was particularly important to this one because Jupiter was then in the same sign where it is now. So back then, beginning at the end of October, Mercury made a series of 3 conjunctions with Jupiter in Scorpio. This particular Mercury retrograde is featuring Mercury partially retrograde in Pisces, which we've completed that portion of the retrograde as of yesterday, late last night, when Mercury retrograded back or moved backwards into Aquarius. So this particular Mercury retrograde features 3 squares with Jupiter, but here's the rub. The first square was February 22nd, and Mercury was moving forward through the zodiac in Aquarius as it applied a square to Jupiter in Scorpio. And I'm going to tell you what this all means in a minute. Just roll with me. The important things that you need to get from this particular part of my morning live is the dates. So don't worry about what the plan is, but some people need to know, so I'm saying that. The first square was Mercury moving forward in Aquarius, square Jupiter in Scorpio on February 22nd. So whenever I give you those dates, it's important not to necessarily take the actual date literally, but also to think about the days leading up to it, because the application of that aspect would have been active those days. So today is the second of 3 squares between Mercury and Jupiter during this whole retrograde cycle. So the retrograde cycle includes 1 square during the shadow phase. That is the time period that Mercury is traveling forward through the zodiac in a portion of a sign or signs where it will later reverse and go backwards. So that was the first square. The second square is Mercury moving backwards over that portion of the zodiac it's already gone forward through and revisiting again that one planet, Jupiter, by square. Then the third square is finally Mercury will have stationed direct and it will be moving forward through the zodiac. Now this is the rub right here. The first 2 squares between Mercury and Jupiter in this whole story and cycle are in Aquarius and Scorpio. Mercury in Aquarius, Jupiter in Scorpio. But the last square, Mercury will be at 0 degrees Pisces with Jupiter retrograde at 0 Sagittarius. So for those of you who follow me on Twitter or who have the 2019 Sidereal Astrology Guide, you'll know that Jupiter briefly jumps into Sagittarius for about 3 weeks before it retrogrades back into Scorpio to finish up its transit there, which will end November 4th. So this last square that occurs on April 11th, Mercury will be in Pisces and Jupiter in Scorpio. I mean, Jupiter in Sagittarius. So let's pause on that and let's really talk about what these 3 different squares mean. A square is a kind of tension or resistance, right? And the resistance comes because the elements of the planets involved are either unfriendly enemies and hostile or ambivalent, and they have no connecting point. Aquarius and Scorpio are respectively air and water. So these two elements have no reference point with each other, right? The whole point of air is that it is not water. Although frequently water will evaporate and permeate the air, and frequently the air will get all worked up and slosh around the water, right? Like we see in storms, waves on the sea, hurricanes, tornadoes, and things like that. So these two elements don't have a meeting point. So they're ambivalent toward each other at best, and they undermine each other at worst. How does Aquarius and Scorpio undermine each other? Well, Scorpio is our physical body and its survival instinct. And Aquarius is dissociating from that. It's saying that I don't have to respond or perceive myself, what's happening in my body, the world around me, or in my mind through the lens of my survival instinct. So in some ways, it's kind of saying I can choose to reinterpret what my body is saying or ignore that my body is telling me something is wrong. And oftentimes that is actually a survival mechanism itself, right? When you are being subjected to serious trauma or violence or pain or difficulty, you tell yourself that this pain is not a signal that I'm dying or in danger, right? You separate yourself from that. Now that could be a good or bad thing, again, because sometimes you need to be able to say this person is not safe, this thing is bad, it's hurting me, it's dangerous, or I am not safe. But usually when you are in constant state of feeling unsafe is when the dissociation comes. So this is how that air and that water can undermine each other. And also Scorpio can really just bring you down into your body in a way that you cannot ignore what's happening to you, and you are forced to make these black and white declarations about your circumstances, the people around you, right? That's really the essence of Scorpio, is making things black and white. There's only two categories for Scorpio. Is it safe or dangerous, right? Is it going to hurt me or not? Is it going to threaten my life or not? Those are the only two categories for Scorpio. And it's very important that we honor that, right? It's very important that we honor that, because a lot of times we spend so much time trying to reconcile the dissonance that we feel about how people tell us we should be responding to something versus how our bodies actually feel, right? The messages our body is actually giving us in order to preserve the body. So one of the kind of phrases that I've used over the past few weeks in talking about this Aquarius square versus Jupiter, of which we've seen many versions, right? Last fall, we saw Mars in Aquarius square Jupiter in Scorpio. Recently, we've seen Sun in Aquarius square Jupiter in Scorpio, and now we're seeing the second square of Mercury in Aquarius and Jupiter in Scorpio. And so the phrase that I've been using is that you need to save your body before you save your life, because there is no life to save if you don't save your body. And so the life part is about the entitlement to have a certain perception about yourself and to have certain experiences in the world, right? This is how I've defined kind of the movement for Black liberation, right? The self-determination of determining what Blackness is and standing in the entitlement to a certain access to things, right? And not allowing the designation of Blackness to define what one person or group of people are entitled to out in the world. So that's the life, right? But the body is actually your physical self. So I've talked about how often that the people who are radical revolutionaries have sacrificed their body for the sake of saving their life, right? So in this particular case, we can think in these terms. In what ways have you sacrificed your body in order to save your life? Or in what ways have you sacrificed your life in order to save your body? Okay. Now, when we have multiple squares like this is really like a plot in a story, right? I know for me, I went back to February 21st and 22nd and checked my journal. I checked my text message conversations with my girlfriend. I checked my 2019 sidereal astrology guide, because I definitely keep notes. Even though some of these aspects aren't in there, because I keep track of them, I will write notes about what's happening on any particular day associated with any particular configuration. So I did go back and, in fact, read some of the conversations that I had, and it was really wild because I didn't realize at that moment that the things that were coming up would be things that I would go back and revisit. Right, things that I would go back and really delve into deeply over this past week, as the second square between Mercury and Jupiter kind of was applying to come together. So that first square, we can say that something is coming up into our consciousness. With Mercury, Mercury is always saying in some way, I am finding the language to articulate something. I need words to say something, right? And that sign is going to tell us exactly what is it that you're trying to say. So in Aquarius, again, we're using words and language to be self-determining, right? To call ourselves what we are, right? Because remember, words are a consensus around how we perceive things, right? If I say apple over there, you turn around and look for an apple. You don't look for an orange, because the word is a consensus for how we are to perceive the material world, how we are to understand ourselves, and how we are to understand other people in our world, right? So it isn't always that we are using words in a literal sense, or that there's an accurate correspondence between the word and the thing. Oftentimes that word is intentionally used to shape and form the way that you are perceiving something. We see this all the time in politics, right? Using the phrase, quote, radical Islam, right? That is not defining something, right? That is meant to shape how you perceive a group of people, right? Using the phrase, I'm trying to think of another one. I can't think of another phrase right now, but I think you understand what I mean, how words are used to shape how you perceive something. And so now with Mercury and Aquarius backing up into this second square with Jupiter, we're really thinking about how words have been used to shape our own perception of ourselves. And how can we reclaim language? How can we find the words to articulate our self-perception, right? How can we find the language to tell the story of who we are and how we perceive ourselves, which often can mean rejecting external designations, saying that this word does not apply to me, myself, my experience, and how I see myself. And it's actually this word over here that defines how I see myself, my experience, and my self-perception. So the second square now, after that first one where something has been brought into your awareness, and you might talk about it in one term or one set of language, right? Or you might tell one particular story about it. The second square is saying, okay, wait a minute. Let's go back. Hold on. I need to stop. I need to go back and I need to revisit this. Because now, especially, I mean, the astrology of this week is so remarkable and really rare, that just as the Mercury has completed its inferior conjunction with the sun at 0 degrees of Pisces, it crossed back into Aquarius, immediately applying that second square to Jupiter. So, excuse me, I talked about this yesterday on Twitter, but I didn't get a chance to talk about it in my story yesterday, my live yesterday, about that 0 degree, that Cazimi, Mercury Cazimi. And so really Mercury Cazimi, right, the inferior conjunction, is the second time in a whole cycle where Mercury has conjoined the sun. The first time was when Mercury overtakes the sun in a superior conjunction and speeds past the sun to get ahead of the sun. Almost as if Mercury is getting ahead of where you're focused in order to catch the lay of the land. And once Mercury goes backwards, right, once it gets too far from the sun, it stations retrograde and goes backwards. And so yesterday, that inferior conjunction was the point where Mercury took all of the data and information and messages that it collected over the past month and a half and brought it into your consciousness. So let me see something really quick. I want to see the date here of when Mercury would have overtaken the sun in that superior conjunction. And I believe it was back in January. Mercury. Nope, that's Mercury square Mars. It might have been in December. Let's see. Mercury direct, new moon, sun, Mercury conjunct Jupiter. No, so maybe it was before then. Let me see. Mercury retrograde, Mercury direct. No, that would have been Mercury conjunct Jupiter too. Sun conjunct Venus, Mercury conjunct Jupiter. Oh, I'm tripping. I'm reading my phone at the light. Hold on, y'all. I'm still driving. I'm going to have to check the ephemeris because I can't find it in my calendar, because I want you to have these dates of when Mercury overtook the sun and got ahead of the sun, right? And so basically, if you know anything about how I understand astrology, you'll know that for me, it's not about degrees per se. There are specific times when degrees of signs are important, but for me, it's about when was the last time any planet transited this sign, period. Because every time a planet goes through a sign, it's like a path is being tread in barren land, right? You're walking through footsteps that have already been laid down by the person before you. And anybody who's ever walked or gone hiking, you know that there are some paths that people take frequently and they are designated for people to walk on with their feet. But there are other times that people, for example, not even if you're hiking, like if you're walking and there's a patch of grass like in a corner, and some people just walk across that patch of grass. So now there's like a treadway that has been made by people's feet clearing the grass there because they keep stepping on it. And so this is what happens when planets go through the zodiac, right? I talked about that Mars transit back in December 10th through December 31st as a pre-Mercury retrograde shadow, because Mars went over that portion of the zodiac where Mercury would eventually station retrograde and go all the way back and go forward over again a third time, right? So we want to say that in some ways there is something significant about the time period when Mercury got ahead of the sun, right? And went past the sun, and kind of the Mercury had to catch up, right? The sun had to catch up to Mercury, which was yesterday. So let me find this date for you real quick. Okay, Aquarius, Pisces. Oh wait, I'm way ahead. Okay, sun. Okay, this looks like it was back in November. This looks like this was back in November. No, that was the last retrograde, so it had to be after that. I think I calculated it before, and it was like 5 or 7 weeks after Mercury stations direct that Mercury overtakes the sun. So Mercury would have stationed direct December 6th. So that means it had to have been in January. And look at that. Okay. Okay, it was January. Yay! Okay, now I can go look here. January, Mercury square, Mercury conjunct January. Nope. All right, January 29th. Wow, that's kind of deep. January 29th was the Mercury Sun conjunction, and this was at 15 degrees Capricorn. And that means from that point forward, Mercury was the head of the sun. So you have to understand that the sun and Mercury cannot be separated as far as a concept in astrology, because the sun is just conscious awareness. It's the intellect and mind, right? But Mercury is literally the words that the mind thinks in. It's the word that the mind uses to articulate its perceptions, to name things, to count and organize and classify. Okay, so basically from January 29th until Mercury stationed retrograde, which was on, Oh Lord, my brain is not even doing what it usually does. I can't even remember the dates. What day did Mercury station retrograde, y'all? It wasn't the 18th. It had to have been like the 26th or something like that. So basically that whole month, right? Mercury was ahead of the sun. And so now the sun is catching up with Mercury, like, yo, Mercury, what you been on? What you been talking about? What kind of conversations have you been having? What kind of revelations have you been having, right? What words have come into your mind, or what words have you been using to articulate something? So yesterday, last night, sun crossed over into Pisces. Mercury backed up into the sun with a mutual application, and Mercury to the sun was like, yeah, so, right? This is what's been going on. Now, Mercury has crossed back into Aquarius. So now we have to go back and we have to revisit another set of conversations, right? The Pisces conversations were about intention and about how you cannot take things at face value, and how words are an approximation for intention, and words are only a correspondence, and they can never stand in for the real thing. And so you're always having to wonder, does that really mean what I think it means? Did they say what I really thought they said? And did they mean what they really meant when they used those words? Did they really mean to use those words when they say that? So now with Mercury back into Aquarius, right, we have like this really like complex narrative about how we're using language, right? How we're having conversations, and how those conversations shape and change our perceptions. So Jupiter, and this is the last thing, Mercury square Jupiter is always going to highlight a dissonance between what was said and what was intended, right? Because Mercury is the actual words and Jupiter is the meaning or intention behind the words. And so with Mercury square Jupiter, the real theme of this retrograde is, that don't mean what you think it means, right? That word and what you said doesn't mean what you think it means. And so now you have to find another word, right? I think that's all I really have to say about that. The only thing I want to encourage you to do is to go back to February 21st and February 22nd. And I want you to look at your calendars. If you have the 2019 Sidereal Astrology Guide, check your journals, check your text messages and your emails. What were you doing? What was going on at work? What was going on in your interpersonal relationships with your family, your inner process, and all of your emotional processing? What was going on? What were you thinking about, and what were you talking about? And how have these past few days this week been revisiting what it is that you were talking about then? I know for me, I literally said things at that time that have come back in a major way, and I really didn't even realize what I was saying at the time. Like, I think I intellectually understood, but I didn't really understand the implication of what I was saying and what that was really implying about how I could interpret my experiences. So, and here's the real last thing. So the real last thing is that Jupiter in Scorpio since October 5th has been requiring or reflecting how we interpret our experiences, our life story, the world around us, what we believe is possible, the narratives that we weave as a measure to interpret what we experience, right? This is all about the survival instinct. So Jupiter in Scorpio literally says, how does my survival instinct shape the way that I interpret things? And this is very literal, right? We have certain needs in order to survive. Our primary caregivers, a roof over our head, food, shelter, safety, bonds and connections with our parents and family members. But Jupiter in Scorpio is really asking you to revisit those stories and how your survival instinct shaped even how you interacted with certain people, right? How your survival instinct shaped the story that you told about who you are, right? How your survival instinct shaped how you've interpreted the experiences of your upbringing, any trauma you may have experienced, or any trauma that you may not have even recognized, right? I've been saying this for a while, that this Jupiter in Scorpio is a heavy transit. And I know people like to think of Scorpio as this magnetic, sensual, sexual, person, but it's not even that. It's literally the survival instinct. So this is why climate change is like ramping up, this new Green Deal, because this is a matter of our survival, right? If we don't fix this one little thing, it's important that we see things through the lens of our survival instinct, because it makes us make changes to our lifestyle. It makes us tell a new story about what's possible for us, and it makes us tell a new story and write a new story about how we need to proceed as a culture in order to survive, right? So that's that on that. I got work to do. I'm going home. It's raining and winter's kind of back in Chicago, but we're gonna be all right. You all have a happy Friday. Unfortunately, next week is just as astrologically busy as this week. Though Mercury has kind of quieted down next week, we do have a full moon in Virgo. Venus and Mars square each other at 29 degrees of their respective signs, which is 29 Capricorn and 29 Aries. And then both Venus and Mars change signs. So Venus goes into Aquarius and Mars goes into Taurus. So it really is kind of a mirror reflection of this week, in that this week we had like the fixed flux-ery, right? We had that moon in Taurus, that sun, square sun in Aquarius, square Jupiter in Scorpio on Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday, right? Moon entered Gemini, sun entered Pisces, and now we have a taste of mutable madness, right? So these two narratives are really connected. Next week we'll be doing the same thing, right? We will have a full moon in Virgo, which means the moon is in Virgo, sun is in Pisces, and Saturn is in Sagittarius, right? That'll be our mutable madness. But then just after that, we get back to that fixed sign stuff, because the moon is going to enter Leo, Venus is going to enter Aquarius, and Mars is going to enter Taurus. So we'll talk about that next week when the time comes. And I hope you all are making it. This week has been tough. The news yesterday and today, just corresponding with the aspects that have been going on, has just really been disturbing and disrupting to our peace of mind. But it's kind of like we have to recognize the things that are a danger to us. And this is the problem, right? This is why we need Jupiter and Scorpio, because people literally cannot say, this person, this group of people is unsafe and they are threatening our survival, right? I wrote about this in September and I just reposted it on Twitter. I'm going to post it again, my forecast about Scorpio, but Jupiter and Scorpio. But the essence of it is that you have to be able to say, you are not safe. You are a danger to my life, body, and well-being, and I need to sever ties and get away from you. Or something needs to happen, because you are a danger to society. You are a danger to this group of people, right? And we have trouble saying that for a variety of political reasons, which I'm not going to go into. But you can think about that in your life. In your life, what people have you not been able to say, you know what? You are dangerous. You are not safe. I cannot be vulnerable with you. I cannot trust you with my life. I cannot trust you with my body. I cannot trust you with my well-being. And I don't care if you try to talk me out of it. You cannot talk me out of my own survival instinct. You cannot talk me out of the drive to preserve my own body, right? That's the real thing of Jupiter and Scorpio. So that's all, for real. I'm saying bye again, for real. I will put this up on YouTube, and all of my other lives are up on YouTube as well, most of them. I will see y'all on Twitter. Have a good Friday. Hope this weekend is easy for you. It's a Cancer moon. Great time to just stay laid up and eat some food and chill out. All right. Bye, y'all.